Hi, welcome to Marketing Mondays with Maria. Hi, Renga. For context, if you're listening to this or watching this, I'm the marketer at Magic Design. And what we do is we let you subscribe to a graphic design team to get all of your design tasks done one by one in under 48 hours. And my guest today is Renga, like you just, we just said hi to him. And he is the co-founder of Anushka Ventures and consultant of multiple startups globally at the intersection of product marketing, and content. He used to work at Deloitte and Nike, and nowadays is also a product and marketing mentor on Growth Mentor, which is how we met. And he also teaches about product and marketing at multiple places like Pluralsight. Yeah, Renga helped me overcome so many challenges over the past months, and I'm super happy that we get to chat today and we can learn all together from his experience about technical content marketing. So, Renga, could you please say a few words about yourself so that people watching and listening have some more context?
Sure, I think you've done a fantastic job introducing me, so there's only little that I could add to that. What I would also want to add is it's been a two-way connection between Maria and me. I think I've learned a lot about planning, especially planning a podcast with Maria, and I think she's everything that I go to for Notion. So it's been a great working conversation so far, Maria. Hope to look forward to many such conversations together.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very sweet. I'm very much looking forward to learning from you because, as a technical content marketing newbie, also newbie at many other things, I'm learning so much from you. But yeah, today's topic is going to be technical content marketing. That will be our focus. And let's start with an easy question. What is technical content marketing in your definition of it?
Sure. In simple terms, the way I would probably explain it to my 9-year-old daughter, technical content is content that you prepare to make sure you break down complex technical topics into easy to understand language for your target audience. So, if you were to explain the APIs, the integrations that you build into your software to a 9-year-old, if you've done it well, they'll probably understand it at the first try. It also needs to make sure that you don't talk down to your audience. You are able to talk to them as you would converse with them in real life. If you're able to break it down and educate them while you're doing so, I think that would be great technical content marketing in my regard.
Amazing. I'm sure it sounds easier than it actually is to do in practice. So maybe you can give us some background also about how you got into technical content marketing.
Sure. So I have been into tech for almost 2 decades now. I've been an engineer for 8 to 9 years building large scale IT systems. Then I got to build the product and design orgs for Deloitte Digital and then Nike. I realized that a lot of the work that goes into building these products is not as effectively communicated and distributed, which is why they might not find large scale adoption or large scale engagement by their audiences. So I realized there's only so many ways I would be able to build a product nicely and see it die an untimely death if it's not distributed well. And as it is, and I'm sure you would agree, Maria, the bar is set so low for content done well. So I felt there's a huge white space about being able to talk to developers, data analysts, engineers, and be able to communicate what a product can do to improve their productivity and lives. So I felt, okay, this is a challenge that I wouldn't mind taking on for myself. But then I later discovered a lot of companies worldwide also struggle with this day in and day out. It especially becomes very acutely evident in an early stage technical startup where the founder, the CTO, is actually trying to see how they can effectively communicate the value of their product to their audience, especially if it's a new age product like in Gen AI. You're building a third party LLM, which helps you improve, create great content, create great audio, video, but you're unable to explain the workings behind it. So it becomes exceptionally crucial that you are able to talk about it in terms that your audience will understand. So that's something that I got into accidentally, but I found great joy in doing it. And I'm sure my clients would also agree because they have found great success implementing it too.
Yeah, I agree. There is a lot of content online, and a lot of it is really not a lot of thought, I feel like, goes into it. So if you already understand who you're talking to, simplify how you communicate what you want to say to your target audience, that already brings you to the top 5% of content. I feel like technical marketing specifically sometimes gets a bad reputation as well. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like it can be perceived as a bit bland sometimes. Maybe why do you think that is, and what can we do as marketers about it?
I think we, as marketers, we tend to hang out a lot with our target audience. So if we are in B2C, we tend to find out how people use our apps to find a great date, find a great grocery, find a great dress. But especially, and I don't know why this happens, the jury is still out on this one. But when it comes to very niche technical audiences, we tend to treat them at arm's distance and not really get into how we could probably see their lives in a way that we could enrich it or complement it for the better. So when it comes to building a great developer experience, when it comes to building a great data experience, we tend to get into the nitty gritties of how to make the technology accessible, but not in a way that could probably complement or possibly even improve your productivity. So the onboarding, the communication, the education on what could be possible with this product sometimes flies under the radar, which definitely can be improved upon. I will give you an example of this with niche audiences. Like, if you see today, even with crypto being around for the last 10 odd years, people still feel that one, it could be a scam, it could be something which is restricted to a very specific group of people. It could also be so that people don't understand completely how it works. But the flip side of it is the content that has come out has also not done a great job of educating people and bringing them into its fold. So, what OpenAI did really well is educate people on what's possible with ChatGPT and let them run riot with what could they do with ChatGPT. And as you see, people do use it for a zillion other use cases than they might have originally thought about. So crypto might need the ChatGPT movement as well. So hopefully we get there. But that's one example of how two really breaking technology products can actually do better with the right approach toward educating its audience. And that's something that I'm trying to do with my efforts with these niche technical audiences.
Oh, I think that is a great example with OpenAI, ChatGPT, like how they marketed ChatGPT and, crypto, all these cryptocurrencies that are still kind of so far removed from, like, for many of us. Like, for me, for example, personally, I still shy away from that topic. And I think one of the reasons is also because I'm not educated enough. So, and I feel like if you're not educated enough about something, you're a bit more scared of it. Of course, you're more hesitant to try it. And I think
Right.
with ChatGPT, what OpenAI did really well is, doing those product demos, showing how you can use the tool, why it's so great, how it's going to change, how you work, how you live. Definitely all of the cryptocurrencies can learn a lot from that. I would love to see them trying this approach for sure. What are, would you say, three common challenges that marketers, in your experience, face when they are tasked with writing technical content?
Absolutely. So to start with, you would see that whenever you're marketing to a developer audience or a data audience, they are not your typical consumers. They don't hang out in the same places where you would show an ad. They don't hang out in the same places where you would talk about your product. So it's essential that you first do your audience research to debunk the assumptions that you might have about your audience. The plot twist usually comes with understanding that these audiences might exist in very isolated subreddits or in Slack communities. So, the first way to be able to understand what challenges that your audience goes through in their daily lives would be to embed yourself into these watering holes, if I might call it. But these watering holes are very different in other pockets of audiences, which are much more large scale, much more larger, much more broader, right? So to find these audiences takes time. I do a fair bit of my research on platforms like SparkToro. I use Gummy Search for Reddit to understand which subreddits people talk about, and also understanding what podcast would people like these listen to, and be able to also find out which Slack communities do I need to get access into to be able to understand what do they typically talk about, rant about, vent out freely without any fear of retribution. Right, I'd say this because of the ongoing WordPress saga that you're seeing playing out worldwide. But if you are able to talk about freely about a product and tell what might it be missing out on, I think that's a gold mine of information and research insight that you could tap into. So that's the first challenge, finding the right places to find your audience, to be able to understand that language. The part where people tend to lose a connection with their target audience is when they are unable to understand the language, the vernacular that a developer or a data analyst would use when describing their problem, and then writing it back in your copy when you're writing technical content. That's the part where you usually lose it. It's great to be able to talk to such developers, such data analysts, and understand how do they describe their problem, and get a insight into their tone of voice, their style. And it could be very different from how you would write ad copy for a B2B or a B2C product. So it would be really essential to understand what is the words, the problems that they describe in that tone and that language. The third part would be to actually show the product as early as possible. When you tend to be in B2C or in B2B for that extent, you tend to delay showing your product until you are able to vet out your ideal customer profile. You do schedule a demo, you do talk to us, connect with us, all of that, because you're trying to vet out if the audience is right for you, just like you are right for the audience. And it's a two-way construct. There's nothing wrong in that, but the audience, if it's niche and technical, would be wanting to qualify your product before they decide to engage and pay up for it. And they're far more, I wouldn't say finicky, but they're far more selective in their approach before they shell out their hard earned money. You would also find that in niche technical audiences, there is a huge indie hacker, indie developer movement, which actually spends quite a bit of money as you would compare to a typical enterprise or a mid market B2B consumer or a customer. But they would like to know that they are parting with their hard earned money on a product that can really deliver. So, the only way to make sure you build trust, you will have to show the product as much as you can, possibly also giving them access to that or any of these models which allow you to try out a product. So these are the three aspects I would talk about. Understanding where your audience lies, talking that language as much as you can, and third is to give them access to the product without gatekeeping it as much as possible.
Yes. Oh my God, these are some amazing points. I think, yeah, research is one of the most important things. Like, you have to understand, yeah, who you even want to reach, where they hang out. Is like interviews also something that you would do? Can you even interview developers? Find someone who would say yes to an interview. I'm sure. Yeah, like developers in my experience are maybe less outspoken sometimes or less like willing to hop on interviews to give their opinion. So is that even something like a tactic that you use when you're doing research?
Yes, but it would have to be a layered approach. So you talk about it in a community where you ask about a specific problem which you see being discussed recurringly. And you see a lot of people might probably be the voices of dissent, or even the voices of admiration for a given product. And they typically become loyalists once they see the product prove value. And once that is done, they would be happy to talk about it as vocally as they want. So talk about it in a forum, find the top voices, talk to them in an interview later on, and you will be able to understand much more, or why they hate or love a product, which you could understand the reasons for it doing so well. Right. So I would do it in a layered approach versus just floating out a survey. And if you're going to give Amazon gift card, nobody's going to turn up for that. Right. It has to be tied to helping you improve the product. And you'll find that these folks will do it without any incentive in mind, because they like the product so much, or possibly hate the product so much that they're willing to talk about it.
It's so bad. I will talk to you to help.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the reaction you want to get.
absolutely.
Hopefully they want to help because it's on the right track, the product, and then they want to push
Yeah,
it forward, so it helps them more in the future, right? Yeah.
absolutely, because they usually have very acute problems and they feel very passionately about it, but not everybody has been listening to them as intently. So, if you
Mm.
actually lend them a ear, you actually understand what's irking them so much about the product, that they are willing to actually, just go away from that ecosystem or that platform.
Yes, but also a great point about giving first in the community, like really providing value, showing that you care, listening to them, engaging in conversations, and then asking for something in return. They might say no, but it's just very important to put in the work up front, and not expect something from the start. I think that's like any marketing thing you do, content, ads, everything. You just have to engage people, put in the value first, give first, and then you might receive back their appreciation or their help. So first is research. Second is like talking to the audience. Then speaking their language.
The third point is to make sure we give access to the product as
Yes,
early as possible.
exactly. That is another point that, like, I think a lot of people do gatekeep their products a lot. They don't show it enough. For me, that is also a big red flag because I can relate why someone would not want to commit to a tool before even having a chance to try it. That's such a simple concept. I understand it's hard for a founder to decide to, give access to the tool, and then the person might leave and, not subscribe. But I think that is super important to show how valuable the tool is, and also the person actually can try it and see that the experience matches their expectations. Let's say you are advising a founder on hiring for a technical content marketing role. What are some things that one should look for, in your opinion? What are the qualities of the technical content marketing manager that you would suggest a person to look for?
Sure. So there's probably not a job description which does 100% justice
That's true.
to this kind of roles. You're going to be hard pressed to find somebody qualifying for a complete job requirement spec that you wrote out. So, one thing I would probably also advise against is thinking that, hey, you know what, I need somebody who has done this before as an engineer or a data analyst before they became a marketer. You're going to be very hard pressed to find someone who has done that before and decided to become a marketer and jump over to the other side of the fence. It would be great to know people who have always been very empathetic to talking to these audiences and they don't talk down to them. I'll give you an example. We want to make sure that these folks understand that most technical products or most niche products happen inside, I wouldn't say walled gardens, but they happen inside vertical platforms or ecosystems. I'll give you a specific example of a product. So let's say you have built an app which does code review, right? And a lot of developers would probably invite each other to do peer review of their code. And maybe there's an AI platform which is looking to build a code review which can simplify the task of reviewing the code for basic hygiene before it actually goes to a fellow developer, cutting down that time. Now, these code review products have to happen in the ecosystem where the code is hosted to. And that will typically happen in an online code repository like GitHub or GitLab or any of the other cloud platforms like AWS. Now, I need somebody who understands that these ecosystems exist, and two, how to get into these ecosystems to be able to talk about the product, the pain areas that they face with existing incumbents, and how your product does better than that, right? The sooner you're able to gauge that they are able to get a grasp of the ecosystem, that's great. They need not be a technical person, but they need to have the aptitude to find out, again, where the audience lies, right? And the audience might typically lie in this ecosystem, which might have a community of its own, right? So that would be the first part, to understand how to get into that ecosystem. Two, it's going to be very hard for you to play it like you would play in a typical B2B context on pricing versus features versus UX, for example, right? You will find that it's a very uneasy permutation of each of these three aspects, right? And once the two parts of it, the features and the UX, are solid, people will stick to it, even if it costs a tiny bit more than the incumbent would, right? And this is an example that I'm sure you would also experience being in Notion. People for the longest time have been organizing using Google Drive, using Trello or Jira or Confluence for documentation, and using something else for for meetings and organizing their content. And Notion ended up slicing through these ecosystems where people actually use it for the agency, and decided to provide a one shop which actually fits all these use cases. But it does not just do it great on features, it does great on collaboration and design as well, right? So it's not just an element of you doing these features well, it also has to appeal to you to be able to collaborate and bring others into the ecosystem. And as a you have been in the Notion ecosystem, so you understand the value that it gets a bit more trickier when you come to niche audiences. Notion is still a very broad audience, they have millions of users. You might not find a millions of developers in a given language, so it's going to be really really telling of a marketer to be able to understand, can they understand the nuance of what is the pricing plus UX plus features
Mm,
equation that actually works well for this audience, right?
yes.
And you're not going to have millions of users in a given ecosystem. You're probably going to find tens of thousands. But the sooner you're able to understand, okay, this is where the 10,000 people lie,
Mm,
you're going to spend more time building trust versus you finding the next addressable market, because there isn't any. All right. So you would build trust among these 10,000 people rather than go find the next million, because that does not exist in a niche technical audience ecosystem like this.
mhm,
Right. The last part is definitely, like I said, to be able to write out really good content. And it need not be written content, it also has to do with video content, like we are talking about.
mhm,
If you find really niche plugins in the WordPress ecosystem, you see rank math, for example, Yoast was in the WordPress ecosystem for years, but rank math only came in a few years ago. But they've been building a lot of educational content on use case driven or pain driven approaches, and that has done really well. I believe they have been able to build that out very very quickly. And to add another example, there have been tons of CRMs and lead generation systems, which I'm sure you know because we talked about this recently. These all these systems, since they have bloated so much, they have expanded so much, they become intimidating for a newcomer to get into that ecosystem. But clay.com came along, created a lot of content on how to enable every tiny and broad use case, that they have been able to address the target audiences pain areas really well, and which is why, when you and I talked about Clay, you were able to get to it so quickly that you actually built out your use case in less than an hour, if I remember right. So I believe that's going to be a very uneasy mix of the pricing plus UX plus education bit for it. And if a marketer is able to understand and create content addressing those nuances in the equation, I think they are actually well set. Will you be able to find them out on day one? No, you will actually find that out going forward, but I'm sure you could test it out with sample case studies or exercises with that.
That
Yeah.
is super interesting. I mean, my thoughts when I was also listening was, yeah, they do sound kind of like a unicorn. So if you do find a good technical content marketer, then treat them treat them well because it
And
does
pay them
sound like
well.
a challenging role. Pay them
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
because they need to understand, yeah, the ecosystem that their audience also kind of finds themselves in. Their technical audience, they have to have kind of an understanding of the challenges that the audiences faces. Ideally, they have to be able to produce some content, some great, well written content that is simple enough, like communicates challenging, complex technical topics in a simple way, which is not easy to do, not at all. And yeah, that is a jack of all trades for sure, but a super interesting role. I think very challenging, but
Right.
hard to find, but super rewarding as well because you learn so much and grow. So
Right.
super interesting. But I think those were great examples of like Notion and Clay as well, how they're doing it, their technical marketing, and how they're expanding. Notion also is starting to integrate with other tools more and more, so they also understand this like ecosystem approach of where are our audience, where are they spending their time and which tools, and kind of expanding into them, integrating them. Recently they announced an integration with Slack, and they have Notion AI integrated into the tool as well, so you can ask Notion AI in Notion a question about your Google Drive files or your Slack
Absolutely.
messages. And that
Right.
is becoming more and more popular as like integrated approach of, yeah, integrating with other tools via API, and making it as easy as possible for people to find their information, to work with their information that they
Right.
have. But yeah, Clay also, from experience, I was trying to get into, lead enrichment and like those sales tools that salespeople use. And I'm very new to this. So Ringa helped me a
Right.
lot with that, how to use Clay, give me a great introduction to it, because I was completely lost when it comes to sales tools. I'm such a newbie. There were so many options. And whenever I used to open a new website of a sales tool, like let's say, I don't know, Phantom Buster or Hunter, or what are some other tools? I think those are some two big ones.
Right.
It's just an overwhelming amount of information that comes at you, and a lot of like buzzwords, like API, webhooks, and and it can be quite overwhelming if you haven't worked with those tools before. So I
Right.
think Clay, compared to all the other tools, was the least intimidating option, but one of the most powerful from what I've tried. So thank you so much, Ringa, for showing it to me and
Yeah, but the
making this
fact that
easy.
yeah, sorry to interrupt
Yeah,
you, but the fact
no
that
worries.
in spite of all these capabilities, it is very welcoming because it looks very much like Google Sheets.
Yeah.
Actually helps. So there are 2 points that every technical content marketer should be able to talk with their technical team about: is make the tool very accessible, or make the technology very accessible, especially if you're going and broadening the technical product to a little bit non-technical audience too, who are willing to try their hands out at a bit of wrangling with no code. But you have to make it a bit more accessible and make it look like a product that they have already used. So in this case, Clay looks very much like Google Sheets on, on whatever example that you might want to give.
Yes.
But it also helps that the tool is composable. And when I say composable, and this is going to differentiate every technical product making technical content too, is that you don't need your product to do 10,000 things. You just have to make sure the product can talk to 10,000 things and get you back what you need. Like, for example, if you're going to send out your leads and enrich them with emails and LinkedIn profiles, but you also want to reach out to them on LinkedIn, you don't have to do the reaching out yourself, so long as your product can talk to LinkedIn and help you send out these messages too in a very simple way. Right? So the
Mhm.
product, if it's composable, it automatically lends itself to a lot of great content that you could create, because now you're addressing two audiences, one who is on Clay and second who is on LinkedIn, and you're actually bringing them together. So
Mhm.
you have twice the audiences that you could attract, right? So it's
Yes.
always going to be a win-win for wherever you're going to pitch your product to. So hopefully that
Yeah,
helps.
yeah, totally. I think that is also another great point because when I was looking at different sales tools as well, I was looking, do they integrate with my like newsletter tool? Do they integrate with LinkedIn? And that is the first thing that I looked at. And if the tool didn't have that or an easy way to find an automation to or a webhook to integrate
Right.
those tools, then I already lost my interest because it doesn't solve my problem. So that is, I think, yeah, a great point.
Yeah. If I might
Definitely.
add one more point,
Yes.
though, and I'm sure this is also
Hmm.
very striking a raw nerve, I would say. Uh, I believe it's not just relegated to technical content marketing, it comes to selling technical products too.
Hmm.
That before you are selling a very technical product to an audience, it's very typical of a sales team to be able to get to somebody who's talking about a need, but they haven't fully fleshed out the use case yet, and they try to push the product to solve that use case, whether it does it in reality or not. In sharp contrast, if you were to sell a very technical product and you want to do the right thing to build credibility, you would give the keys to the kingdom in a manner of speaking, let them try out the product, and you will see that they don't even require a sales call. They will just go ahead and sign on the dotted line and just get started with talking about the product. And they might not need a typical sales cycle. You are enabling it in a
Hmm.
product led motion, which actually lets you generate enough sales and enough revenue without having to sell it to the audience or force fit it to their needs. Right. So
Yes.
I don't want to ruffle any feathers here, but I hope you understand that this is very
Yes.
relatable with niche products like these.
Hmm. Totally, and it will save the founders and the team also resources if they don't have to go through the sales cycle, the typical sales cycle of booking a demo and then trying the
Right.
tool and then following up, and that is such a long process. If you can cut that part out and the person just tries the tool and then subscribes or commits to it, that is of course a much shorter sales cycle as well. So that in in the end will benefit, I think, would benefit most
Absolutely.
companies to do that. And I think Clay also does it well. We talked about this as well before. Clay has a very generous free plan. We sound like we're ambassadors for Clay, but we're not. But they have a very generous free plan. And I tried it first, and now we are committing to this tool because it's just the easiest thing to switch from the free plan to the paid plan. Having tried it, I don't have to redo the setup or do anything. I can just, pay and it makes my life easier. So that's how your tool should feel like, I think. And the other point that you mentioned about Clay looking like Google Sheets, or like your tool having to like ideally look similar to the tools that your target audience is already using because it makes adoption easier. I think that is another great point. And it reminded me of building landing pages because I'm, of course, a bit like in the design world
Right.
right now. When you're building landing pages, you also follow a very clear structure, and that structure is typically very similar. So you have the header, you have the social proof, you have your value proposition, your benefits, some more social proof. So there is a very clear kind of layout of the page, and that layout or structure, you can see it on multiple pages across the internet it just repeats itself because it works and because people are used to it. And there are some companies that try a completely different approach. They make a revolutionary landing page that has thousands of animations and is a bit confusing to navigate. So
Right.
that I think in those cases, like, it makes sense to stick to what's working, to what people are used to, so that they understand what you do, how you do it, who uses the tool. So that's the same, I think, with this approach of making the design of your tool similar to the tools that the audience is using already.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on the future of technical content marketing, especially now with AI and all of this craze? Maybe you have some thoughts on how you see
Oh,
it evolving.
I'm hoping that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where my role goes out of operation, I would say, because companies are allowing more and more people to try out their products and decide for themselves before they actually pay out money for the product. And we already are seeing the cost of building a new software for your own needs go down to zero, because with cloud and with Cursor, or you're using it with Microsoft Copilot, you're able to build out your entire, not just the front end, the page, etc., but also an entire end-to-end app. So you see a lot of people try their own hands on what's possible by bringing these three four products together to build it out. I'm hoping that you don't need to actually go create content anymore, because your users are creating the content and documenting it either on video for you, or
Mm-hmm.
as a short form content, which becomes the best case for you to sell your product. And you're enabling your users to go wild with what can the product do for them, versus the original use case that you built out when you were actually trying out the first version. All right. And if you're able to do that, if you're able to communicate and get one of your own customers talk about the product, you don't need a marketing team to talk about the product, because your customers are doing it for you. Now that's kind of a self-destructive thought, because my job goes out of fashion. But I'm guessing we will only enable the sales team, the technology team, or even the founding team to understand how to make these products much and much more accessible
Mm-hmm.
to a target audience, to be able to build that out, and then just give it in their hands to see if they play around with it and unlock more possibilities. Right. So it would be a way to then build a community of such people who would want to try out use cases, versus having to sell it to them in the first place, having to create content for them in the first place. You can then concentrate on making sure they get their best community, which keeps giving ideas back to your product team on what to build out next, and see what else can be made available with the platform that you have in store. Right. So that's how I see the role evolving. You see this happening already in pockets with crypto communities, with data communities, with engineering communities. But I believe community building is an art that can only be done once, because if you fail at your community building aspect, people will not come back to it again. Versus
Mm-hmm.
if you're running a series of ads last year, if you run it this year, that new ad creative and still
Yeah.
click on it. But if you've been in a community, you found that it's dead, nobody talks anymore, it's just
Mm-hmm.
lying around, you would probably lose sight of that and will not join it back again. All right. So it's a one shot opportunity, but you've got to hand it responsibly well.
That is a great point, that you should
Yeah.
only create a community when you're ready to actually nurture it. Like, if you're ready to actually nurture it, because creating a community for the sake of it and then leaving them to do their own thing and not putting in, the time, the resources into it will lead to this community dying out, basically. And then it's very hard to revive. I don't think it's impossible. I think there are things that can be done, like, creating more content, making it more attractive to join the community, and then also setting up maybe reward systems or some kind of tier system for the community, so they strive to, I don't know, for example, get points to level up if they produce content. I think there are some great examples to that, especially in B2C, actually. B2B, not as much. But I know a few B2C communities that are doing it really well, like Loop Earplugs and Waterdrop. They're building amazing communities, and they have like a tiered system where the more content you create, the more you buy, the more you leave reviews, the more you engage in the community, the better it is for you, basically, the more you get from the community. So I think
Right.
it is possible to revive, but it is very hard to do. So if you do decide to build a community, I think my advice would be to put in as many resources as you can towards it from the start, and actually have a good strategy and plan in place before committing to it, because it's a big commitment, right?
It is, and it's a treadmill which you cannot stop because you've got to keep nurturing that
Yes.
community and
Yes.
continue incentivizing people to give to the community more
Mm-hmm.
than they take from it.
Yes.
And I would respectfully disagree with your point that you find
Yeah.
it more in B2C. You actually find it more in B2D, or business to
Mm-hmm.
developer communities a lot, because you can't incentivize them with money. You can't. They usually are passionate enough to give back to the community
Mm-hmm.
on what they think should be done. So if you find that in HackerNoon, you find that in Stack
Mm-hmm.
Overflow, you also find that in Reddit with the karma system. I believe the moderators and the karma system is what keeps Reddit from spiraling into absolute chaos. But I believe that's what keeps the community alive. You'll see Reddit has probably one of the highest engagement in
Yes.
social networks because of its niche audience aspect. If you see subreddit to subreddit, people are very, very active on an average. And I don't think it needs to be a technical audience, it can be a niche audience, but if you serve them well and allow people to talk about issues very candidly without any malice or without any offense, I think you can build a great community. But you need
Mm-hmm.
resources to build that out. You need somebody who continues to shepherd the community to a better place and not let it languish into oblivion.
Another topic I wanted to touch on is marketplaces, because we briefly discussed it. And my question for you is, in your opinion and in your experience, should the marketing strategy and content produced for a marketplace app, like a Shopify app or a Chrome extension, be different than for a full-on SaaS product? So, for example, for Notion versus for, Grammarly when they were an extension, is there any difference to content that they need to produce and how they market it?
I believe so, because it had to be just like you would tailor. So let's say you are a B2C app, right? So let's say you're building Instagram, or let's say you're building a storefront which is B2C, you're selling wellness products, right? Now
Mm-hmm.
the way you would go on to talk about your product in short form content on Instagram or on TikTok is going to be very different from the way you talk about it on long form on YouTube, or in long form content on LinkedIn or any of your blog aspects, right? Similarly, when you are in the marketplace, I would treat it as a dedicated channel. So if you're on Chrome or if you're on Shopify, the way people end up consuming your product will be very different from the way they would do it in the other marketplace, right? So I will give you an example. The way people consume Grammarly, or I consume Grammarly on its standalone Mac app, is very different from how I consume it in Google Docs. Right? Now, one might argue, hey, you're using it to correct your grammar or write better language, but I'm actually using Grammarly within Google Docs for my blog content, but I
Mm-hmm.
might be using Grammarly on the Mac app to just send out an ad hoc email. So the purpose of the content, although I'm using Grammarly to improve my content. The purpose of the content itself is different. So the
Mhm.
use cases that unlocks might be very different too, right? And
Mhm.
I hope that when you're building it out for a given marketplace or a given channel, you tailor it to that channel versus just repurposing it blindly for all the marketplaces you have in question, right?
Mhm.
One more example that I could probably give out is you trying to understand if when you're using a Chrome extension, and let's take an example of detailed. Now, detailed is a SEO extension that people usually use to get quick facts about a website. Now, when you use it on a particular website, it gives you stats about a particular page, etc. But let's say you're doing it across the site, you want to know how you would be able to use it to understand a site's overall health, what content is doing well.
Mhm.
Maybe the Chrome extension might not do well, so you would probably engage details, entire team or whatever offerings they have to be able to do it at an entire site's level. All right. But if you want to be persuaded or convinced about SEO plugins merit, you would probably start out with the Chrome extension, but you would gradually then build it out specifically on their own product where they built out the entire suite of offerings for SEO, right? So
Mhm.
that might be one way of looking at it. I would treat each marketplace as its own channel and make sure I create content just for that specific channel in mind, but eventually put in nudges for them to try out my end-to-end product eventually.
Mm. So you would say also a Chrome extension is a good start, or is a good entry to your full-fledged product that you can then market through the extension, kind of, no? Or through the marketplace
Right.
product.
So, for example, take an example of Taplio. Taplio is a
Mhm.
LinkedIn, a LinkedIn growth tool. They have a Chrome extension which sits on the right hand side of your LinkedIn dashboard. So as you browse LinkedIn, you look at somebody's post, it will give you a great snippet or great detail about what posts have done well for them, etc. But that's not going to help you solve for your own growth issues, right? You are the one who needs to go comment, post, engage with other people. But you got a sliver of the promise that Taplio holds because it can show so much data. So you might be intrigued in knowing what can the full platform do for me. So probably that's a great way of convincing people to signing up for the entire platform. That actually got me convinced to go for the entire platform too. So I actually use it pretty extensively these days. So hopefully that's an example that
Yeah.
serves well. It might not always be a Chrome extension because I can give you a different example of a Shopify app. Okay. And
Mhm.
this is a Shopify app I worked for building their presence in the Shopify marketplace. But the extension that they built for Shopify only works on Shopify storefronts. And not everybody builds their e commerce store on Shopify. Some build their own storefronts too. Now, building that Shopify storefront might have taken a considerable bit of effort, but as stores grow along, they go off Shopify to build out their own custom storefront. But when somebody was at that stage that they were using Shopify for e commerce, they were convinced that this particular app does its job really well. So, as you grow along, they will be intrigued to find out if you can help them build it out in their own custom e commerce store as well. And surprise, surprise, you might actually build out an independent plugin or independent product which sits inside their custom store too. So you never know. People's trust usually runs years versus just minutes or hours in a given product. And as niche as the product can be in Shopify marketplaces or in Chrome
Mhm.
ecosystems, you usually use them for years and even forget about the fact when did you install it in the first place,
That's
right?
true.
So you'll have to build along the journey of how people started using your plugin to the point they might need a full blown app for their custom needs.
Mhm. It's a great great point about looking at the customer journey as well and seeing where your product fits and where any side products or extensions could also fit in there to build trust and then lead people to where you want them to go. I think
Yeah,
that
and
is
I
a
know
part
you're
of
a
it.
big fan of customer journey, so I guess this probably fits into your role of, you're not sticking to a given ecosystem, you're evolving with the customer as they grow,
Yes.
expand more offerings, etc.
Yeah, yeah, it can stem
Yeah,
from your research. You can notice any trends in your audience and their usage of the tool, and then you make decisions about the product. Yeah, super
right.
fascinating. And any final advice that you would give to marketers like myself, if I were in a technical role, to improve their technical content?
Don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot to take in, especially when you start a new role in a company which sells, let's say, plugins or sells Chrome extensions, whichever is the case. It can be very hard, especially if you have not worked in that industry or that subsection of that industry before. It's a lot to take in. So sit down with the dev team, sit down with the engineering team to understand how it works, and pay close attention to how they describe how they build out their product and how they talk to their engineers and customers. It will give you great notes which you can't find anywhere else on the internet on how to describe the product too. Right. Again, feel free to lurk in these communities that I told you about, these closed Slack communities, which are usually based on invite only entrances into these communities. Hang around, talk to people, understand what they do without any goal in mind to sell them a product. And feel free to take the first month just talking to people in the community. And yeah, I think it takes months if not years to build out your competency in a given domain, right? And the only way to do it is day by day, so enjoy the process. It can be very different from what you learned if you were in B2C or B2B, but it's very, very rewarding, and you end up learning a lot more than you would probably end up in a B2C or a B2B aspect, because the audience is so engaged. They will tell you very quickly what they want from the product, so it's very rewarding that way.
That's amazing advice. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for this, Renga. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I've learned so much about technical content marketing. I wouldn't have learned otherwise for sure. So thank you so much. I'm sure everyone will love this episode. And yeah, stay tuned for more Marketing Mondays with Maria, and chat soon.
And likewise, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for your time. It's been a lovely
Thank you.
conversation, and I hope to have more of these with you. Yeah. Thank you.